Now, what I want to discuss is this. Is the subject matter of friction or conflict. Now, if I was to put my two fists like this and we have two opposing things, that would be a kind of like a demonstration of one thing opposed to another, and there's a sort of a friction. Now, in human life, friction is all over the place. People are in friction with themselves, husbands and wives are in friction, children and parents are in friction, we're in friction with circumstances. Countries and other countries are in friction. Human life, the experience of friction, of myself being in friction with something other than myself, is a continual and recurring thing. Now, we have to kind of understand this, because if we're going to understand the value of graceful acceptance, or a relation to life in which there is no friction, I just want to be very clear on the fact that friction is definitely a problem. Now, if we look at the structure of friction, if I'm upset with myself, let's say I've done something, I go, oh, I shouldn't have done that, and I'm starting to beat myself up about it. What that's like is I'm having the experience of me being a person opposed to the person I don't want to be, opposed to myself in that case. Or if I get into friction with someone else, they've done something, I find myself as a person resisting, being annoyed, and an annoyed person, an irritated person, an antagonistic person in friction with someone else. Or I might be in circumstances I don't like. Now, we can be in a relation to what is without friction, but normally what happens is that something happens that we don't like and we're in friction with it. Now, Swami Dayananda says that basically all we have is ourselves and everything else is the world. It's pretty simple. We have ourselves and everything else is the world. Now, what happens though in friction is it's always ourselves as a person who is annoyed, irritated, hating what is happening, disagreeing what is happening, refusing to accept what is happening. There's always this feeling of me against something. And from my point of view, it always seems that the problem exists with what I'm in friction with, whether that be my spouse, my children, my boss, circumstances, or myself. It seems that the problem is what I'm in friction with, never the fact that I am in friction. So I'm experiencing myself as a person who is in friction. Now, the thing is that, and the other interesting thing here is that when we're in a state of friction, we never recognize it as friction as such. You see, if someone upsets you, or let's say that's how you view it, someone has upset me, therefore they're the blame. I've gone on to that subject before. When I have the experience of someone upsetting me, what happens is my attention is riveted entirely on what they've done, and I'm just simply reacting. I'm not actually aware that I'm in friction, that here I am here, here's the situation, and I am fighting against that. I don't see that because that requires discernment. It requires an awareness to know when I'm in friction. Now, when we commit to living a life of being in harmony with the whole, what's important is not awareness of all the different friction stories that we involve ourselves in. What's very important is to be aware that we're actually in friction. The actual perception that we're in friction. Normally we're not aware of that, like I said. We're caught up in the story. I'm upset about this, and my attention's on what I'm upset about. And it never really occurs that whole suffering experience of me being in friction with something other than myself, that the problem is centered on the one who is in friction, not what you're in friction about. Now, the resolution of this problem will not come by trying to control or change what is actually happening. Now, that doesn't mean to say you don't do things to improve conditions. I'm talking about in the sense that you're not going to remove, you're not going to bring about a quality of being in harmony with what is happening through friction. That's like trying to making war to make peace. It just doesn't really work. So the point here is that if we're to resolve the issue of friction, we have to be aware when we're in friction. And the problem is that as human beings, we've been in friction for so long. It's like being in a stinking factory. After a while, you don't notice it. But as soon as you commit to living in a peaceful and harmonious relation to what is, the first thing you start to notice is how often you actually go into friction. You know, you might be sitting there with yourself and you go, oh, I'm a bit bored. What's something to do? I'm in friction with myself. I'm not happy with myself. Or when people say and do things that we object to, we might be reading the paper and we're furious, or we may not like the weather, or we don't like our jobs. So constantly we're in friction. Now, as I said, we're not normally aware that we're in friction, and also whenever we're in friction, we're always experiencing ourselves as a certain kind of person, a sense of I. I am angry. I hate this. I can't stand this. I wish this wasn't here. And in Vedanta, that's what's considered the problem. It's the sense of I that's considered the problem. But the experience when I'm in it, I'm always experiencing what's happening to me, what appears to be happening to me is the problem. So it's a problem because it's happening to me. So when we really see the value of a life, of living in harmony, in other words, without friction, we see that value once we begin to really understand that we're caught up in friction all the time. And it's important to see that and become aware. And if in your own life, if you're to honestly examine it, you often find yourself in what Swami Dayananda calls the ninja stance. We're always fighting. And so we're struggling with. We don't like this. We're kind of like involved in a struggle against ourselves, other people, or the world. Now, this struggle, if the struggle can be resolved, there is a tremendous change psychologically. It's not that you change, but as an individual, you relate entirely differently to the whole. And the whole purpose of the psychology of the Gita is a very practical way of life, a way of living with everything, including yourself, the whole lot, with everything, without being in this state of friction with what is. And that's what we've got to look at. And in order to realize the value of that, we have to see that this constant friction, me being in friction, me being in friction is the problem. It's not other things, myself, other people, or the world.